All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the launch of our white paper, Customer and Global Retailer Sentiment 25-26. Absolute pleasure for everyone for us to be in the presence of everyone and the opportunity to talk this through. So I might just take a second to introduce our esteemed panel today. So starting off with Mr. Brian Walker, affectionately known as the Retail Doctor. He's the founder, CEO, and chair of Retail Doctor Group. And we look forward to hearing some insights from Mr. Walker for, I believe it's the 6th year of this program, Brian.
It is, Josh, and nice to be here. Hi, everybody.
Nice. But also introducing Dean Salakas, our knowledge partner, knowledge management partner, Retail Doctor Group. Dean, thank you very much for being here. And also myself, Josh, as the GM of Operations and Insights. Post this session as well, we will make sure that all attendees do get a copy over the next day or so of this white paper to review. We do have a good hour together, but what we're going to do is just run through a lot of the high-level initial findings and look forward to receiving any feedback as part of the journey.
Thanks, Josh. Everyone, as Josh has said, we're delighted to bring this to you today. This is the 6th year of this particular study. At Retail Doctor Group, we get very close to insights, market, consumer, business, global, and we build insights-driven strategy, which takes us then through into distribution and brand growth. But the difference with us is that we have a retail operations focus. So we're all about implementing the strategy, if you like. And then we have certain proprietary models through those programs. And we have a separate business entirely, which is an academy-based training. And this program of works, such as the white paper, essentially is about understanding retailer strategies. So we went out to retail leaders, both domestically and globally through our membership and partnership with the Ebeltoft Group, which is a worldwide advisory consulting practice. And we've gone out to all our member countries and we've interviewed retail leaders to get their strategic imperatives, to understand their objectives, their drivers for where they see the next 12 to 24 months, their priorities. And in turn, we've gone out at the same time parallel to consumers in these markets. And we've looked at particularly Australian consumers and we've understood their priorities, where they see their whole shopping journey, the channels they'll use, what they're thinking about, what matters to them, and then effectively align that to the strategy work of the leaders and really looked at the gaps. And therefore, of course, with our background and expertise, the how to close them. I also want to call out Lightspeed, our partner in terms of their panel development for the surveys. And I'm delighted to have Dean with us. Dean's joined as a knowledge management partner. For those who don't know Dean, and that would be in the vast minority, Dean is a very experienced retail leader and advisor, both in full omni-channel, online and physical retail. Josh, of course, has been with us for a few years, which is fantastic, and building up our insights work and runs the operations of the business. So Josh, let's move forward.
Right. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so a bit of an overview of some of the findings from this white paper. We've really clustered this into 5 key topics that we look forward to exploring with you a little bit further throughout this white paper. Well, one, it's around customer behavior. It's predicting responding to these changes. It continues to be the number 1 strategic priority for retailers, but also developing the customer understanding is their number 1 interest personally as well. But what we see from a retailer's perspective is that they continue to face this pressure, again, this blending, this balancing of customer attention and operational delivery. Digitalization. So customers are increasingly open to new shopping concepts, personalization, subscription, live streams, TikTok shops, and they're all gaining traction as part of these new concepts. And retail leaders expect digital sales to keep rising steadily through to 2030. And that statistic, which we'll explore a little bit further, is actually expecting their sales to be circa 50% by 2030 as well. Loyalty, 51% of Australian customers say that loyalty encourages them to visit retailers more often, and 31% say it encourages them to spend more each time that they visit. And 54% of Australian retailer leaders describe themselves as customer focused, with most initiatives, but most of the initiatives end at CRM and loyalty programs. So we see that there's a clear focus there on Australian retail leaders and their CRM enablement, but also there is a connection between how Australian customers perceive those loyalty programs. But we look forward to exploring that a little bit further. People remaining the number one area of scarcity, and that's both in Australia and globally. And also enhancing customer or company culture, training and development are seen as the most important strategies, both globally and locally, to address these shortages. And one of the really interesting concepts that we look forward to exploring further is this concept of AI integration. And it's actually how the customers are using it versus how the priorities that are set from a retailer perspective as well. And what we initially see is customers are cautious yet optimistic about AI use, mainly using it for time-saving aspects, practical aspects in terms of search, understanding products, mixes, where to find stuff. Retailers are increasingly seeing more and more value as part of AI in their operations, and specifically in terms of BI and information analysis, marketing, and supply chain.
I think one of the underlying narratives is the narrative of change. What we're seeing is an acceleration of time, both in terms of strategic imperative and delivery for retail leaders, and an acceleration of time and choice for consumers. So consumers are generally feeling more pressured, but they have much more avenue now, as we know, to shop and to consume and to make their choices and to communicate with one another via the ever-growing social media channels. So retailers are thinking, as we move into retail leaders focus at CEO and board level, about how do we navigate through the period ahead and what are the priorities? Well, this really leads us into the opening point. When we go out to interview Australian CEOs, what we see is that 82% of these CEOs recognize the need to change. And of course, traditionally strategic plans were, 3 years, possibly 5 in the long term. Now they're 1 to 2 years, if that. And terms like thinking around agility, mobility, future-proofing, and keeping much more fluidity in strategy has become the norm for Australian leaders. That too, we think about the metrics of strategic return, economic, people, social. They're also becoming shorter measurements. So change is very much on the agenda for retail leaders, and that's also true of our global counterparts. And I think the point that Dean has made to this paper, that this pressure testing of business models becomes more frequent. Intervals of quarterly checks, tests, pressure test, make sure it's on track against the outcomes desired. So this example of faster, more mobile, more penetrating, and shorter term results.
Thanks, Brian. And we see how that cascades into the retail leaders' strategic priorities. And what we can see is just the shifting patterns that have happened, especially over the last year, and also in contrast to the rest of the world as well. And as we called out in the overview, adapting to and predicting shifts in consumer behaviour remains the number one priority, but that's also escalated across the last year, both locally and globally. And we see also some trends, and more so in Australia, about this concept of store network optimization. So what does this look like from a store or physical experience rollout? Do I appeal to my customers do I focus my priorities on appealing to my customers on a digital lens? Do I need to establish the physical experience more thoroughly? These are part of the high-level considerations. And as we go through key considerations there, linked to the optimization aspect is this acceleration of digitalization, still remaining quite a high priority, although it has dipped in the past year, and it has decreased significantly from a global perspective as well. So we can see that there's quite a lot of strategic tension, and where do we invest? How do we understand what's going to get us the best return on capital as part of this expense?
What this work showed us, thanks Josh, was this idea of network optimization is not what it was. We talk now in terms of building communities, integrated, omni-channel or ever-present communities. We talk about going back almost to this less shops, hierarchy of shops, dialing up experience, and Dean will touch on some of the elements of that, in this idea of right-sizing fleets. We're also seeing generational change. And we've only got to look at our domestic landscape to see that some of those legacy brands that built a store on every corner are starting now to see that, in fact, they don't need as many stores. They're centralizing brand. They're centralizing a lot of those direct-to-consumer activities, seeing increased competition. And so that's redefining space. But we also know that the jewel in the crown, to Josh's point, of retail is the physical store. It's the experiential heartland. So essentially, it will vary from business to business, but store right-sizing and optimization to enable digitalization is key. And the study bears that out. I'll move through this one fairly quickly. Of course, we're seeing some of the pressure points for our leaders. Inflation, as we know, coming out of the 23-24 period into 25 is now starting to be much less of a concern. Interestingly, cash flow, margin management are high priorities, no surprises there. We do see movement on staff retention, but only marginal. It still remains a very large focus, as does recruitment. More focus from our leaders on their e-com, their digitalization capabilities, not just in terms of capital spend for the architecture and the infrastructure, but also for people. And now we're seeing more of a need for AI specialists in organizations, which sits into this space. And linked to that, of course, is systems and the focus on systems investment, which has been strong now for a number of years. Supply channel, well, again, we'll touch on AI, but a much greater focus. We're seeing much heavier competition from the direct-to-consumer models. Retail leaders are starting to feel that. The Amazon, Shein, Temu models collectively last year were about 9 billion Australian dollars of direct-to-consumer market share, which came out of a fairly static retail growth year. So clearly supply channel, getting product faster, fulfillment, all these areas are rising in importance. And we saw focus, and probably not quite enough, on staff training, and we'll come to that. So retailers have got a lot of pressure points. The movement of them, we're focusing much more now on the customer and much more preparation for that customer.
And as we move through for understanding Australian retail leader customer priorities, we see that loyalty remains their number one priority for the next 12 months, followed then by well-trained, friendly staff, in-stock positions, and then increasing theatre in store. So we're really seeing about this whole concept of making sure that it's really about the enablement of how we retain those customers, how we engage those customers to continue to come back to us time and time again. It's building those tribes, building that relationship with them. Because we're spending so much money, investing so much money into actually acquiring them through the brand delivery, through the messaging. We want to make sure that we're able to retain them and realize that investment spent. But then also, how are we also delivering from that perspective too? So we've got our brand delivery and our brand promise. So the brand promise can bring them in, but how well are we executing on the well-trained and friendly staff? How well are we executing on our in-store theatre and engaging that customer as part of that progress as well? We see further down the line some of the other considerations like personalization. Yes, that's significantly increasing versus last year, and customer targeting. But when we have a look up the front end of the chain of where our customer priorities are, it really does link back to this brand promise, brand delivery.
What's interesting is we know that over 90% of Australians have a loyalty program of some description. And one of the pieces that we talk about, and for those who've seen our white paper on loyalty, and if not, please contact us, recently was that we saw a very high focus on the value of emotional loyalty, understanding that tribal belonging versus transactional grocery type loyalty. And the other quick call that I'd make is that whilst we talk about transparency of inventory data, we talk about augmented reality, it's not yet really impacting the psyche and the behavior of Australian consumers. So there is a gap, a clear gap between conversations and the work that's being done in these areas versus consumer awareness and preparedness. So that lag is interesting, and retail leaders are seeing that. They're zeroing in on essentially preparing for the future, but investing more in the short term at these deliverables that we're touching on, such as a good loyalty program, people, and of course, product in place. It was interesting to see as inflation rates decline, both here and in other countries, but particularly in Australia for this one, we start to see a growing confidence moving from somewhat pessimistic in previous years to slightly more confident, and we see a greater confidence in financial position. And when we looked at the macro of Australian financial in the last 12 months, we saw a definite move to value in 24 months in retailers as consumers were moving to value, influenced by cost of goods living, which is starting to come back, influenced by, at the other end of the spectrum, Australian consumers that owned property were seeing appreciation in their capital rates. So they were putting more on their bank accounts to offset that. The banks have never had higher deposits. So what we see here is two things that are worth thinking about. One is that retail leaders certainly planning out that year to 2 to 3 years and thinking about those macro factors. What we get considerably from consumers is not that time span. They're far more immediate. Consumers are far more living in the here and now. So whilst we talk about this idea of the two aligned, in reality, consumers are a lot more about gratification, make it about me and make it quick. And the time span of retailer thinking is typically longer. But the financial indices are strong. I expect we'll see a strong Black Friday period into Christmas, and particularly if we see another rate rise come early November.
How have the Australian customers changed in terms of their shopping habits? So look, they've really stayed pretty steady over the last year anyway. What this does reinforce is it's retailers needing to balance their cost and delivering value and quality experiences as well. So when we have a look through at some of these key changes, or what actually becomes a priority, is even though we are feeling optimistic in terms of our spending and how much we do have in the bank, we are conscious of how much we are spending as well. So it means that we want to receive the value out of that. And as Brian was saying earlier, value can be received in many different forms. That can be received in terms of the product, that can be received in terms of speed of fulfillment, and it can also be received in terms of experience. And so this is really where it's about zeroing in from a strategic lens about what is important to your customer, coming back to that high level view of who is my customer, why do they come to me, and how do I prioritize them as part of this experience. Now, looking at the aspects of shopping online, we can see that there's that saving time aspect stays very steady. We see slight increases in terms of human interactions, but essentially the priority hasn't overly changed in the last year. So again, it comes back down to this whole concept of how do my customers receive value out of our offer? What do they prioritize from us? And how do we consistently deliver that time and time again?
Yeah, and I might just add to that, Josh. Also, obviously, you can see from the top there that, the last year it was 47% and this year it's 37%. And that difference obviously is spread amongst the other options there for customers. And so obviously there is just a slight paring back of focus on price and more focus on value and other elements that impact the customer experience.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it also speaks to all the channels that are opening up and the immediacy of the experience. Yeah, I think that's a great comment. Well, of course, from this first section, so what should retailers do next? Well, of course, it is about getting closer to market trends, global trends, and really using much more research-based predictive analysis. It's very much around thinking about the small percent stuff, the agility of the retail delivery and deployment, working with subject matter experts around looking at the trends, because the trends are dramatic and will only continue with the likes of AI and so forth. And it also is about bringing innovation into the business.
Mm-hmm.
It's a term we haven't used a lot of in the last while, but it's about bringing game-changing strategy where it's appropriate, innovation, technology enables that. And then finally, it's about thinking more and more around shop efficiency, online efficiency. We're seeing that operational issues are increasing pain points for retail leaders. And so continuing to grow that brand unique differentiation in the way we've talked about, and thinking less ultimately about channels, much more about the brand and the deployment of the brand, and coming back into this focus on operational efficiency.
Okay, and that wraps up our first section for retail leaders. And as we launch into our secondary section, artificial intelligence, one of the global hot topics.
Yeah, we're intrigued about this because, of course, this is the buzz term in all sectors. You've only got to read the media to see its influence in education, arts, science, and so forth. And you could be in a room and be convinced that the world will be dominated by this massive search engine, which is essentially a patterning machine. But what did it really mean for consumers today? What did it really mean in their buying? And ultimately, how were retailers thinking about it in terms of their strategy and focus?
And so what we see from a retail leader lens as well is the step change across the need to adopt AI as part of the processes, both operationally, internal facing business aspects, and also externally. How do we then personalize the customer shopping experience? And when we compare that sentiment versus last year, we see this significant change in the Australian leaders' perceptions, saying that it's increasingly become a higher priority, or they strongly agree the need to personalize that using AI, or that shopping experience using AI to meet our customers at that point of interaction is increasingly important. And what we see from the world perspective as well is they've remained very steady on that sentiment versus last year. But even more so, integrating AI into our retail operations is crucial to stay ahead of the competitive drive and innovation. And that's significantly changed, up to 71% of sentiment strongly agreeing with that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting in there how last year the world was pretty on top of AI compared to Australia, who was, a little bit further behind. And then we've come up as a country where the rest of the world is in terms of its thinking around AI, which shows we've caught up pretty quickly, but we did start a little bit behind.
And we've caught up pretty quickly. And the key thing that stands out to me here is also penetration and understanding. So because it's been such a popular buzzword for realistically the past 3 or 4 years, but AI has existed for decades. I think the first artificial intelligence, actually, Brian, you know that stat better than me. When was artificial intelligence first coined or first utilized?
1956.
You're saying Brian's old, Josh? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that he can recall. That's what I'm saying.
No, I read about it. It's even before my time, Josh. That's how long it's been going. But I do want to make one other quick comment. A year ago or 2 years ago, people would talk about AI as this sort of nebulous, super intelligent being or something. But in fact, it's all about patterning at the moment. That's what it does brilliantly. And what we are seeing increasingly from our retail leaders is more understanding of the various platforms, the various usage, from prediction, personalization platforms, through to BI platforms, through to supply channel type platforms, logistics algorithms. And they're getting more and more particular and precise in how to use AI. And they're setting metrics. And that's the natural evolution from its mass market exposure. That's the natural evolution. So AI sits, as it does with any strategic tool. What are you trying to achieve? Why are you trying to achieve it? What's the benefit? What's the value? And then AI plays its part. And for those who've read the Apple paper on hallucinating AI and the way it can turn on itself, be very aware it's not necessarily the omni-truth to these things. It's still very much in its nascent stage. I'll move to the next stage if I could.
And as these concepts keep evolving, it always comes back down to this, the concept of how do I want to use this, or where am I able to use this in my business, whether it's customer facing, internal facing, and then how are we expected to deploy this, and how are we going to measure this moving forward as well. And as we transition through, we'll also see some of these the barriers to what those AI adoptions are, largely led by the skills gaps and lack of talent to be able to implement, but also again the understanding linked to core business value or core business propositions of how am I going to use this.
Yeah, I don't know if you've got a couple other quick call outs. One is privacy issues, of course. The other, of course, is the talent. Once again, we come back to people and talent. They're all there, but it's certainly outlined in the paper. I think we'll move through these, but just to give you a sense of the way that we're aligned to both global ambitions of retail leaders and the way customers are thinking about it. Business intelligence, analytics, and marketing, they're the two call-outs for AI use, as they are globally. No great surprise. And then other platforms will play more and more of a role as we go forward.
Yeah, I think also on that, the other thing that you can see there is that customer service is a bit further down, and customer relating or augmented reality solutions, all that kind of stuff. When it comes to customer facing AI, it's a little bit lower on the priority list than back office activities and optimization.
And that keeps coming back to this concept of how are we meant to use this in customer service? So it can be like a holy grail for us to paint that picture, but again, how is that physically developed? Whereas we see this significant step change from a marketing perspective, but when we think about all the APIs and integrations that have been released to complete MarTech stacks over the last 3-4 years, that picture of how it's being used is very clear in the business. So it's becoming more and more clear.
That's a really good point. I think that's where, obviously AI, the benefit, I guess the problem with AI is it hallucinates, but it's kind of it's what makes it so great, and it's also a bug. And so when it comes to things like fraud detection and customer service, it's very risky to put it in front of people in those situations.
Oh, well, what that showed us, of course, in 2025 was that there was some apprehension with consumers and this topic called AI. I think born naturally enough of a lack of understanding of what the AI platform is and what it's being used for. But what we saw was that there was a growing number of consumers, Australian consumers, about 47%, who are sort of open to this AI product solution. So that showed us that 53% or thereabouts were still quite resistant. I think what we're seeing is a cautious consumer. It wouldn't, retailers who are going out with sort of AI solutions tend to be more, as the guys have said, much more back office, productivity gains, less of this customer interface. But what we can see as AI generations continue and the growth continues, naturally enough, you expect Australian consumers to become more confident, comfortable, and increase the use.
Yeah, I think interestingly also with that, like obviously 18% of people are very likely to trust AI is not the overwhelming factor there. The middle is where we're seeing people are like, yeah, I kind of trust it. What this doesn't show is, that, it gives a result and that we may or may not build trust with that result. But trust is also about the connection with the customer. And, when you're getting an automated response, that connection is not really there. So I think that's just another consideration.
That's it. And it's also what that customer is trying to achieve as well at the same time. Is it the quick things that can be easily answered by someone on the spot instantaneously? I understand what I want to know and I can move on. Or is it something that you have to, wait for a real human to answer and spend 20 minutes on a call waiting for that as well? So, but the whole concept here as well is as the penetration of the category actually improves over time, because this is the first time we've asked this, and not a lot of other external researchers actually asked these types of questions before as well. But it'll be interesting to see how that changes or progresses over the next few years as we become more comfortable with these concepts.
And I think, as we quickly on that previous slide, of course, that question is specifically around: are you comfortable with an AI assistant or chatbot providing you with a shopping suggestion or a product suggestion? So I think it needs to be taken in that context rather than sort of it's really quite precise around this, and we're seeing still some caution.
Yeah.
And then linked to that exactly is this advice simplification, this comparison, that's what dominates the current use of AI tools today. So when we ask Australian customers, have you used any artificial intelligence to help you research or decide what to buy? That's what really stands out. And in terms of those, there will be no surprise to anyone, but ChatGPT or those similar AI agents very much dominate the aspect as well. And as retailers start to understand and invest a little bit more in this concept or even test out the boundaries, we're going to also assume that that will form part of their communications with their customers as well.
Yeah,
This
I mean,
talks
this may,
to that.
yeah, go for
Oh,
it,
so
Brian.
this talks to that time lag that we've touched on.
Yeah.
Essentially, in the moment, 67% of the respondents are not using AI for shopping advice in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
So retailers are spending money on AI. The larger cohort of customers aren't using it yet. Now,
Yeah.
that's changing, as Josh points out. And I think, Dan,
Yeah.
you can sort of build on that.
Yeah, I was going to actually say something similar along the lines of that, I was at the NORA Gen AI Summit and there were some stats thrown around about that, 6 months ago, it was a negligible amount of searches were, people using AI to search for products and use it for shopping decisions. 3 months ago or 6 months ago, I think it was, or 3 months ago, it was around 3%. More recently, it's 6%. And they're expecting, as it is today, around 10%. So that acceleration, while, currently people are not using it as the majority or the main tool for search around product discovery and shopping, it's accelerating at a rate of growth. So I expect next year we'll be chatting about this survey again, and we'll be talking about how big AI is in product discovery. It's not there today, but I think that's what you said, Brian, there is spot on, that retailers are investing in it because they see it coming.
Yeah. And it does signal from a marketing point of view for marketers to be thinking about AI type based searches as distinct from traditional SEO type searches and linking that to products and so forth. So as Dean says, it's coming downstream quickly, and next year I think we'll probably see the inverse of these numbers. Points
that we've sort of covered on the previous ones, well, indirectly very much, but asking ChatGPT or any other AI assistant to help you with the following. Look, it's the price comparisons, finding those deals. It's the convenience powered search that is occurring. So where we would traditionally have gone to Google to say, where do I find or where can I get a product or what do I need? Where we're starting to move towards, or where this whole concept of GEO is it becomes this powerful comparison tool of what can I get, where can I get it, how much can I get it for, how fast can I get it as well. So it really does create this convenience-driven approach for customers for the future.
Yeah, I mean, just to overlay again, similar sentiment to what I said on the last slide. I'm doing some research in the background, but it took Google, I think, 5 years to get to the number of inquiries that ChatGPT has today. And we're only 2 years into that journey. So, it's just going to continue to accelerate faster and faster. So again, like Brian said, I think in 12 months' time, we're going to see the inverse of these numbers.
Well, I think this is really saying more of the same, isn't it? I think what's essentially interesting here, of course, is a preparedness from Australian consumers to get into AI. Retailers need to facilitate it. It's new. It's still in this nascent stage, but Australian consumers, by and large, are curious and will use AI tools in the future. What's interesting also to contemplate around this is retailers educating their customers on the use of AI and how they use it in product selection, price selection, and so forth. We haven't seen much of it, but I've seen a bit of it overseas, where retailers are on the front foot about educating their customers on the AI platforms they're using, dedicated apps, and so forth. So what should retail leaders, do next? Well, I think it's becoming entwined into the way that business is done. So it's really understanding that, by the way, not all customers are the same. Different consumers will take different usages and preferences into AI, and that's becoming fairly obvious in the way that they search. It's certainly, from a retail strategy point of view, very, very clear mandate on how AI will benefit the business in what area, from supply channel, customer personalization, prediction, through to business analysis and so forth. So it's about finding exactly where we need to be in that space. And in understanding the evolution of AI and keeping a keen handle on where that's going. And of course, using AI increasingly, not just in cost down productivity type spaces, but certainly in aiding and assisting retail deployment and the coalface. And as Dean said earlier, what we are seeing from a lot of consumers is a little bit of early reticence to be talking to AI chatbots and so forth. So again, we go back to this central human experience where we can. Any comments there, gentlemen, before we...
Just the other point around SEO and GEO, obviously the customers are using AI as well. And that's the other key point from the research there, I think, is that, the customers are going to start using AI for their searching, and retailers need to get fit for what's coming down the line in terms of how the customer's actually going to do their shopping behavior in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
Yes,
absolutely.
and it's where where these changes, they're not going to be drastic changes that are going to be any sort of silver bullet, but it's about making sure that we're taking them into consideration for the future strategy. So again, it's that positioning of where will the customer be in 5 years' time, and how do I put the actions into place today in order to meet them where they're going to be. All right. Thanks, Jen. So next we'll move on to the retail ecosystem, and we'll go through this section pretty handily. But what we've generally seen is, again, channels used in the past 12 months. We've seen a little bit of a clawback in some of these independent methods or locations, but what we see is that the physical stores still remain the primary channel for customers. We do see marketplace against have a consistently strong secondary place as well. And we see a slight decline in standalone stores and also those local shopping community shopping centers as well.
I think the thing that is really calling out here is I think there's a real shift back into great physical retail, where it's done well, where it's accessible, where it's entertaining depending on what the offer is. And then we're seeing these other networks, if you like marketplaces and so forth, being adjunct to that physical experience. And you can start to see it in some of these numbers. Whilst the standalone shows a small decline overall, we see the large shopping centre remaining within a range reasonably consistent. We're seeing some decline in marketplaces. So overall, we're seeing customers having more choice, using this breadth of channels, but ultimately the heartland is the physical environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think interestingly about that, this data, I think, is the classic what we've seen at Retail Doctor Group over when we're talking to clients. I mean, if you talk to the consumer says, I do most of my shopping online. The reality from ABS data is that 80% of consumers are actually purchasing in physical stores. So there's a complete disconnect around what consumers think here. And you can see that in these results. It doesn't tell me that 80% of customers are shopping in stores. So, but this is a customer survey, and this is about customers, and they believe they're using a lot of click and collect and marketplaces and and e-com and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that's not what's actually happening in ABS data. And I think that just shows about the psychology of the customer.
Yeah, I agree with that comment. I think there is this interesting piece where the customer will sign off on shopping, this segregation between online and in-store is far less segmented for the consumer, ultimately. But where do they spend the majority of their time? Where do they spend the majority of their actual physical expenditure? In the physical.
Yep. I mean, the majority of that obviously starts online as well. So don't want to discount the place of digital.
It's more of the case of we can't view this in isolation. They're connected together. It's the layers of the experience.
Yep.
Yeah, and what the digital shows is it's a very strong adjunct to the physical experience. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which is interesting.
speaking of physical experience, how do retail leaders think their store networks will change over the next 12 months? Well, we actually see that we see a slight comparable decline versus last year in terms of store network and for more stores. We do see actually quite positively we see it less stores has contracted versus last year as well. But the majority of respondents, or actually just under the majority of respondents, still say that there's going to be no change, although it has increased versus last year. It's again coming back to this point of, what is the role of the store? How does that impact our customer? Stores need to continue to combine this experience, the service and fulfillment, rather than the purely transactional components of the past.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, we've got world-class retailers and we're building world-class retail. I think there's a real move towards this hierarchy of physical space. I think this one-size-fits-all shop on every corner is going to be less prevalent, to the earlier comments. And the commentary here about the enduring power of physical stores. We're social by instinct. People like people. We're third in the world in shopping centre per capita usage. So increasingly, look at Mecca, look at Rod and Gun, both in Melbourne, opening these mixed category physical environments where there's beauticians and bars and all sorts of things around these cosmetic and fashion retailers. And they're building these wonderful magnets for human sociability and selling some products at the same time. So rethinking the role of the store, and many of our retail clients are thinking about store of the future. They're thinking about partnerships, collaborations, and they're rethinking this idea of the enduring power of physical stores and reinvesting in them. We saw less than 30% of retail leaders expected the share of digital sales to increase above 50% by 2030. So when they were asked what share of your sales came from digital channels in the last 12 months and what are your expectations, this, of course, is very category specific. But what it did show was that we didn't see the vast majority of retail leaders thinking that all the growth or the majority of growth coming out of digital would grow exponentially. And I think what we're seeing now is that retail leaders are thinking about, okay, what is the role of omni-channel? What is the role of physical integrated with digital into a seamless brand experience? And how do I best do that in terms of physical store growth, network capability, and of course, AI included there. So we're seeing a real renaissance in some respects back into the power of the physical space. And we saw this globally as well.
Absolutely. And then when we review that in terms of how that's been translated from the selling platforms as well, it's the channels that allow for strong brand to customer engagement, again, remain the key channels for retailers. The two primary aspects, website, physical retail stores, even though slight decline that in overall usage, but what we're seeing is an increase in these alternate platform usage to grow revenue. So it's not that our website or a retailer's website is going to be the be all and end all for driving engagement and future revenue transactions. It's all these other platforms that our consumers live on, and it's the Facebooks, the TikToks, the Iconics of the world, the marketplaces. It's being present where our customers are, and retailers will continue to adapt those platforms and broaden their digital reach to keep pace with media consumption and ongoing change in behavior.
I think that the other quick thing here is that we probably will, or we will capture more of the direct-to-consumer models because they're going to have an effect here as well. But I like this terminology about adaptation of the platform. I think we'll see much more fluidity into strategy, as I touched on earlier, and much more thinking about how do I put my brand where the customers are versus the classic of I'm going to put my brand where I want the customers to come to. And be thinking much more about mobility and agility in format where they get their brands,
Yep.
and the way that they connect with customers across all channels simultaneously. And we've seen some nice examples of that. This one, naturally enough, talks about paid marketing channels. And once again, we see digital marketing is certainly the most prioritized channel for advertisers amongst retailers. And of course, we're seeing more brand sponsors, more brand visibility engagement through the likes of sponsorships. But when we look at the growth in websites, a little bit flattening out on social media, which still continues to grow, the SEO search engine reasonably consistent, but small decline. And of course, Google, I think AI is playing a bit of a part in that. And then the rest, but have a look at newspapers, postal advertising, vehicle signs, all those classical ways of communicating and paying into marketing channels and communicating brand are coming much more to a social media focus, a digital focus, and also entirely appropriate given that the majority of consumers now will be millennials who have the buying power, and Gen Z are coming up quickly. And I think this reflects generational change as much as anything.
Absolutely.
The catalogs are here.
Yep, catalogs are decreased from 41% in 23 to 22%. So again, those traditional avenues. And the key concept here as well is, and it comes down to the category of usage, is there is a time and a place, but it's about effective targeting of customer. And what's our return on investment for this as well? You know, are these being distributed to where our customers are?
Yeah. All right.
Cool. And speaking of where are our customers, a quick overview on social media engagement and the trends. And what we can see is that Facebook and Instagram, you know, no surprises there. They still remain, you know, the largest channels that people are on. So when people or when other businesses say Facebook is dead, it's obviously not, because there is a significant amount of time that's being spent on this, as well as Instagram. But what we find quite interesting as well is this continued rise of TikTok and Facebook, as well as TikTok and YouTube, and really coming down to this contrast of long and short form platforms, understanding the type of content that we're able to be used, the type of content that these consumers are consuming as well. It's about adapting for those models at the same time. So if I want to reach the customer that goes on TikTok, what is my approach? If I want to reach the customer that goes on YouTube, what is my approach? So there is playing room for both.
Yeah, I think interesting about this, just as an overall summary of it, you know, the bigger channels are getting bigger and the smaller channels are getting smaller.
Yeah.
You know, as what you can see there.
Yep.
So Facebook was already big, and it was the biggest for the last 3 years, and it's gotten bigger. You know, same with Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. So the big channels get bigger, and the rest are in decline.
I think we sort of touched on some of this concepts used, tried in the past year. I think in the interest of time, I'll leave this with everyone. But essentially, you could start to see that there's a much broader range of choice and dilution in each type of channel accordingly. Again, this is really around, well, what should retailers do next? Review current customer journey, understand the drivers of loyalty. We obviously use Limbic, and we're very much on the psychographics of behavior. Understand where customers, so understanding where your community lives, building an emotional and practical connection to them. And then, of course, once you understand your customer, you're able then to align marketing. Now, we come from a position of insights drive strategy. So you kind of expect us to be looking closely at the way retailers are thinking about genuine insights and understanding their consumer, their type, who they are, why they shop that brand, why they go to competitors, and of course all their lifestyles.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. All right. And we'll hand over to Dean to lead the customer centricity and people opportunities.
Yep, conscious of time that we've only got not long left, so I'll power through this really quickly, and I'll keep it briefer than I was planning to. So I'll skip that first part of this slide. The two key things I take from this thing, the question, you know, for that second set of graphs there of the two graphs, the second graph, you know, we asked retailers, which of the following capabilities do you have in place or are planning to put in place in the next 12 months? CRM and loyalty has been and still remains for the last few years the main primary capability for retailers. Interestingly, customer-focused leadership has grown over the last 3 years as a key focus for retailers. I just think that's interesting. You would have expected customer-focused leadership would always be a key thing for leadership, but obviously in the past it hasn't been as big as it is today. This next one, the key standout there is the on the left. So again, we asked retailers what's your currently what's the most where you're having the most difficulty in terms of hiring talent, and it's in retail operations. Compared to the rest of the world, that 25% next to the 55% is what the rest of the world thinks around the difficulty in hiring in retail operations, and in Australia it's 55%. I think that's interesting because that makes our market very unique compared to the rest of the world. And a lot of that would have to do with our very expensive wages, and we put a lot of emphasis on the people we hire and the quality of that talent. So it naturally is in retail operations a large focus in Australia. That graph on the right, I'll just again touch on 2 key points there. We asked again retailers, what strategies has your company implemented, and investing in employee training. What strategies have you invested in to deal with the challenges that were in the graph on the left? And the key one was investing in employee training and development. The second one there, investing in or enhancing company culture, as the 2 main drivers, and that's consistent across the world. Where Australia is really interesting compared to the rest of the world is implementing flexible work arrangements there, where in Australia that's 30% versus 13% around the rest of the world. That's really interesting that in Australia that's a key focus for leaders. And I guess that's got a lot to do with lifestyle here in Australia and the complexity of our award system. Loyalty programs. So thinking about, we ask customers. So this graph, is a survey of customers and the influence of loyalty programs on the customer. The first 2 sets of information there compared to the second 2 sets are all about the benefits of loyalty programs. So customers are increasingly saying it influences me to visit more often, and they're increasingly saying it influences me to spend more. So loyalty programs are doing their job. They're getting better and influencing customers more and more. I would also say that reflects that the playing field has risen in terms of loyalty and what customers expect, because if they're more effective, then it obviously becomes a more cluttered space. Yeah, we'll jump on, Josh.
And just on that last point as well. So again, we know from research or RDG Insights research that 97% of Australians are a member of a loyalty program in some way, shape, or form. But again, over 70% of consumers are influenced by that loyalty program. But it's not the key aspect here is that when we consider loyalty programs, it's not a one size fits all. You need to know about, again, who is your target customer? How do you want to build that relationship with them? How do you build your tribe to develop that loyalty? Because other than that, if we're not having that approach, it just becomes a case of giving money away for very little return, or that concept of they might come and shop with us again.
This next one, obviously another survey of customers of what what is most important to you in terms of customer service. And the number 1 thing that they said was friendly staff. So, that's not surprising, but I think it's a great reminder of what's the most important thing for the customer, and that's having friendly staff. So that comes a lot back to thinking about recruitment and who you're recruiting. And, there are culture considerations when you're recruiting, and there are capability considerations. And I think thinking about the culture is a critical element when it comes to recruitment, because that's obviously going to impact that top point there. The next 5 results there are all around capability. So can the staff answer my questions? Are they not salesy? And a lot of that comes back to training. So that's probably the key takeout from that slide. So this is a survey of retailers now. Probably should have said up front, guys, but the red graphs are retailer research, and the blue graphs were customer research, so that's just why I keep reiterating what the research is about. So this particular set of research is a survey again of retailers and the key training challenges. The biggest challenge for retailers in training is time constraints. So that's the time for the staff to conduct the training, and that's the availability of time to develop the training. That's the number one constraint. The second issue is employee engagement, and the third challenge is ROI and the cost of training. I think that the takeout from that is that if time is the main issue, that training has to be exceptionally effective, because if that time is going to be an issue, that when you actually do it, that it actually is value add. So I think that's the key takeout from that.
Yeah, I thought from the previous slide too, it's worth saying that there was high cadence amongst customers who wanted friendly staff. Absolutely agree, Dean. But they also wanted them to be well trained. So those two together were by far the dominant customer expectation. And that's been consistent over the years.
On this next one, again, retailers were surveyed on, what do you believe your current training programs are in achieving their objectives? So the effectiveness of training programs and what they use for that. So customer feedback is the number one source of determining the effectiveness of training. And Retail Doctor Group do work with clients on customer surveys and use that in a leaderboard to determine the effectiveness of training. So that's something that we do a lot here at Retail Doctor Group. And I think the research kind of shows why we do that, because that's the number one feature. The next few things there around sales growth, reducing staff turnover, customer engagement, I think all that stuff is obviously other ways to measure staff training, but the key one is customer feedback. So just to sum it up, I think over half of retailers say that they are customer focused. That was interesting. Leaders are addressing their skill shortages through optimal training and enhancing company culture. I mean, just to give a shameless plug to what we do at Retail Doctor Group, we have a training division or a separate sister company that does training. But for us, it's not about the training. There are a lot of training organizations out there. It's about a full loop and having effective training. So we have dashboards for retailers that show not only what's completed in terms of training, but how effective that training is, what the mystery shop score is. We have a dashboard that shows the full loop, and then that leaderboard can be used internally to reward and recognize retailers or stores within the network that have effective training and have effective results to complete the loop with effective training. And that's something that we do and something that we're very proud of, because I haven't seen, with all the retailers I talk to in the market, it's not a dashboard I see very much. And it actually is a bit of it's a gap, I think, that retailers are typically having training and measuring whether people are doing the training, but they're not doing the next steps, which is measuring the mystery shopping against that training, measuring the customer surveys against that training, and then updating their training to reflect the results that come out of those measures. So that's something we do. And if anyone wants to talk about it, come and talk to me, and I'm happy to chat more about that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Steve. Okay, and just for a quick run through of our last section, and we'll wrap it up in the next 3 minutes.
I'm going to do this in 30 seconds because it's all in the paper. But essentially, what we're seeing is that global retailers are showing us some confidence, and we're seeing that displayed, and we saw that in the domestic macroeconomics. So I think we're seeing, generally speaking, cautious confidence is the way I would describe it, with a greater focus on profitability out of operations. So I thought that was some good positive signs there. Subject to Mr. Trump's tariffs and anything else that can go on globally. And again, this slide reflects that domestically. I think this is a good lookout for boards, a good slide for boards to be thinking about stewardship, governance, the way that they're working with their executive teams to understand consumer confidence or otherwise, not only in the industry, but their categories. Talent and labour are the main areas where Australian retailers, and generally speaking, are facing scarcity. So acquisition strategies have to be very, very deliberate. It was touched on. So too does retention. And we're seeing a breadth of new skills being required, notably technology, AI, and so forth. What we also saw was shortages in financial resources and logistics were also call-outs around people and around planning. So for this section, really, as I've touched on, cautious optimism is probably a nice way of saying it. We do understand and see from even this work, this need for retailers to continue to dive into understanding their customers at a deeper limbic type emotional level and building very segmented models in all the ways they go to market, from product through to AI enhancement. Everything old is new again. The real focus on people in retail, training effectiveness, which was nicely covered by Dean, is really showcasing the focus in on our people in retail, the human experience of retail. And of course, we certainly see the winners as the most adaptive, agile, fastest to market, innovative, and certainly understanding customers at a very deep level. And being provided and spending their capital wisely and their operational expenses efficiently. And so in our 2030 program, working with our clients, we see this high preponderance of understanding from leaders that their business requires change in a changing context. We serve that need as well in one of our programs called the 2030 program. So please feel free to get in touch with myself, Josh, or Dean, and we'll take you through that. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Dean, who's joined us recently, did a great job today. Thank you, Dean. And Dean is heading up our knowledge management, our training and learning, a lot of the work we're doing with clients in that space and across all our operational programs. Josh, as head of insights, thank you very much for bringing this together. Thank you very much for your insights and commentary. As head of consumer insights and our operations, and I'm Brian Walker, founder and CEO of Ebeltoft Group. It's a delight to bring this work to you, and we thank you for attending. I think, Josh, you mentioned that you'll be sending this work out to whoever would like it, download it.
Yes, so we will be popping this on our website the next couple of days, and obviously as attendees for this webinar, we will provide you with an exclusive download as well. So keep an eye on your inbox, and it'll be with you in the next day or so. But other than that, thank you very much for everyone. Thank you again, Brian. Thank you again, Dean, and also thank you to the wider Retail Doctor Group team, including Renee, to help bring everything together. And obviously, thank you to those that have attended, and look forward to seeing you all in future events.
And our friends at Lightspeed. Thank you, everybody.